Good morning, everyone. And as just give me 1 second. All right, okay. Um, my name is Sivram, and then I'm part of iLink Digital consists of a family of companies, each one of them focusing on specific areas, specific technology competencies. So that way, I come under, I head a business unit around, conversational AI, basically technology involving natural language processing, voice based, applications. And today's session, it's more around, how do we leverage one such technology for a combination of, I've just given the heading is kind of but interesting, or for someone, there are like two major elements there. One is data activation, the other one is with conversational AI, right? So I head the business unit here, around conversational AI, and been doing this for close to 6 years now. And before that, pretty much spent a significant portion of my time in Wall Street building technology for Bank of New York Mellon, and then right. So with that, let me jump into this. I may need close to 60 minutes today, and it'll be a combination of slides versus, I'll also show you examples from one of the low code platform we have. It's which around this, the topic for the day, which is around data activation and conversational AI. So I'll be jumping back and forth between the slides as well as the application, just to make sure I give you some context in terms of what I'm talking about, and then how we are really applying those technology concepts around these two problems, right? One is data activation as well as conversational AI, right? So just a little bit of context, before I jump into this. Um, or let me also put it this way. Um, there are like two sections where I just for people, who are not familiar with these concepts, I'll just set some context in terms to explain these two. And then, I will, as I said, I will really show some examples with our low code platform in terms of how do we even achieve, this with some good examples and all that, right? So just some context, if you've been working on the data warehousing or business intelligence space, data analytics and all that, for some time, I think these are some familiar, problems, which especially in large organization space. Analytics effort, despite being, despite all the large investments we made, both in technology, people, whatnot, right? I think the money spent, time spent, still, I think, the analytics effort, there is some discount in terms of, the ROI from these analytics effort. And the second one, I'm sure, people who have worked in the BI world would really be able to relate to this. There is just way too much of too many dashboards and reports and all that. I've been in companies, or rather even in my, there will be like hundreds of these legacy reports. Each one of them, obviously, they do cater to a specific business function or a need, but at the same time, there are just way too many of them, and then way too many KPIs and dashboards, and then sometimes even using the familiar applications, like whether it is Power BI, Tableau, whatnot, or even handcrafted web applications, right? I think you ask them, the adoption may not be in proportion to the amount of money that is spent in building these dashboards and all that. And the third one, especially with every company becoming digital, and then the way in which we accumulate so much amount of data, metadata, or rather, what we call is the data glossary, the data catalog. I think all of that is also becoming a huge deal. There is always this conflict between, the business terms and then the technology terms. How do we make the KPIs or the outcomes, make it much relevant for the business folks and all that, right? And the last one, self-service BI, or rather, if I have to call it, um, the technology or the BI report, which is produced with very less technology team help, or rather taking it closer to the business users. I think that area, still it's still way too complicated. There is a lot of effort involved, even for us to either make changes or produce new metrics and dashboards and all that, right? So with that context, there are some statistics which very clearly says, I think, typical still, despite the investments in data warehousing, big data and analytics technologies, I think, information access is still, it's a pipe dream, or, it takes significant amount of time and effort, right? And also, I found this very interesting graphic in one of the HBR articles. It's like, so today, if we take our personal life, everything is kind of very momentary. You can hail a cab and do so many things, just from a smartphones. Why should getting access to, or rather, getting access to information for all our personal needs, for example, right? We rely on our search engines. We just go and ask a question, and then we are able to find that. Why shouldn't that be the similar experience, even for enterprise data? Why should application, or rather, getting access to information within a business context should be so difficult, right? I think, it still takes a lot of time and effort, right? So if we just really look at it, there are today's, if you take the modern data rich or a digital world, I think, every company is really accumulating very large amounts of data. I think, these are some of the realities. Users still struggle to get access to it, information. And then the number 5 is also very, very important. There are like just way too many tools. There is one for dashboarding, one for reporting, one for, data distribution, so many different things, right? And all of this definitely, are some very, very typical challenges, which we can very easily relate to. And if you really look at the modern day data needs, I think, it's more of, as I said, if not today, even the coming days. We're already talking about the influence of Chat GPT or generative AI, right? I think, it's able to answer, or rather, generate answers for any of those prompts. You keep hearing about prompt engineering becoming the next big thing and all that. It's a different question how trustworthy, or of course, all these generative AI LLMs, they tend to hallucinate and all that, but still the intent is more towards, can I really get quick access to information, right? Especially from the very, very large volume of data companies are accumulating, right? And it's almost like, can we try to replicate a search engine like experience, just like, how we would go and use that for any of our personal needs, right? And can we really use, even in terms of, so today, we look at a metric, we also, keep collaborating with others, in terms of, validating or, taking an action and all that, right? So with that context, as I said, there are like 2 key items, in a topic today. So I'll just, it might sound a bit disconnected, but at the same time, I'll try to put them together by the end of the session, right? So let's start with what exactly is conversational AI, as well as, our simple definition. It's the application of modern technologies around natural language processing, which basically gives you ability in language, in our case, let's just stick to English. So what exactly do we mean by that? Let me quickly show you an example. Okay, so this is one of our application, so it's called Kia. I'll also talk about it. So it's like when I have a data set, like this. So if I need to ask some questions like, hey, show me the daily trend of shipments with dissatisfied feedback, so on a particular time frame, rather than trying to look at, a typical report or a dashboard. I'm just having, or rather, this application kind of provides the ability for somebody to just ask a question in English, right? It can be anything. Say for example, I can even do that. Hey, it's like, so, it could be anything. On this particular data set, or I can even go to another one. say for example, this one is on, okay, let me quickly go to another one here. This is another data set on, say, something around, a sales information or an order book related information, right? So if I go here and ask questions like, hey, um, something like this, I'm just asking the question in English. So it's like it just gives me those information, and then right, there can be whole bunch, as you can see, there is a whole bunch of questions which we have asked here. And basically, it's your ability to communicate. In this case, communicate with a data set and ask questions, and then it just kind of responds back, right? So this is what I mean, in the sense, um, one very common example for conversational AI, which many of us would have used it at some point in time. It's the chat bot, right? You go to the one which is at the bottom right corner of almost every website. You go and ask a question. In our case, we used similar technology, for data insights. I mean, like the examples I just showed you, right? So it's basically, I mean, why the idea behind this application is more towards this. Even when we are looking at a report or a dashboard, there is a whole bunch of questions we have in our mind. I mean, it's like, what I mean, say if you have launched a website, you would like to know, hey, what pages do users spend most of the time on? What channel do the customers in this particular age group they use? These are the kind of questions which we have in our mind, which we try to get an answer by looking at a dashboard. So there is always this cognitive, in terms of for us to trying to interpret a metric, and then trying to get the answer which we have, right? I mean, these could be the questions we just related to the problem at hand. So our approach is, why can't we let users just ask those questions they have, rather than trying to of dashboards, or a metric, which for a certain reason, right? So it's like the main problem, which we're also trying to solve here is different users. I mean, the main problem with dashboards is that, we are kind of preconceiving a bunch of KPIs and saying, hey, these would be relevant for certain users. But at the same time, you have extremely diverse set of users. Each one of them have, their own data need, their own questions. Sometimes, even in a typical meetings, we can end up like, there is always this one question, which however prepared we are, there is this one question, which is missing, which results in, hey, what, I'll get back to you on this, or hey, we just call somebody, hey, can you answer this, right? I think that is precisely the problem we are trying to solve here in the context of data analytics. Why can't, rather than, trying to pre-create dashboards and reports, why can't we let the users ask any question they have? I mean, within the confines of the attributes at hand, right? I mean, so that's the whole idea behind trying to apply conversational AI related technologies to solve a problem like data analytics, right? So why are we even doing this, right? I think there are a few reasons. One is, I mean, many of you being in the BI world, as I said, would be very much familiar with this. There is just way too much of what we call as the death by metrics, too many dashboards and KPIs, charts, and think in some places there are like more dashboards than the number of people. I mean, way too many, and each one of them take their own time to build it. If you have to really make a change to it, I think it becomes a project that is, it just goes on and on and on, and then becoming extremely painful, right? And the information access, it's still way too technical. I mean, in the sense, it is not that much closer to the business users or people who, I mean, you still need to be familiar with some of these underlying technologies to consume this. That's why we are kind of saying, why can't we just make it extremely simple, which is just by communicating in language, or rather, in simple English terms, right? And this one, I think, this cycle in terms of how we produce and consume information, right? So this cycle just goes on and on. I think in many places, for people to get access to information, it's like, finding the right data source, getting that answer, and then, I mean, usually the answers lead to more questions, and then, till we have all the information for us to make a decision, right? I think this cycle kind of, especially finding the data source and then, getting the answers, um, in terms of, getting new projects, or I think it just goes on and on. It takes, extremely painful amount of time. So, and again, just to put it in a different format, we call it as if it is the infinite loop of data and BI. User has an information need. It's like, then how do they really go about it? It's like, open a project, you bring in the data elements, and then, you add another metric, and then, it just goes back again. There is one, I have the data for 6 months. I don't have it anything beyond this. Okay, can we really increase it? Time frame, right? Or I don't have this data attribute. Okay, let's just add the data attribute and then, create another metric. I think this cycle kind of goes on and on. And then, one of the primary reasons for the data and BI projects to, take a lot more time, right? So what we are really saying is, that the modern information access challenge, it's not about the ability to capture and store data. Today, companies do spend, I think the underlying technologies have also matured significantly. The unit cost of storage has come down drastically. So I think companies are spending extremely large amount of money and technology in capturing and storing that information. Now, it's more like, how do we make this easily accessible, right? I think that's the problem, of, or rather, that the modern day data problem is, right? How do you really make this easily accessible to your users, right? That's where we are saying the technology as solution using conversational AI, could be really extremely useful, right? So basically, we're saying when your users have momentary questions on data, right, rather than them looking at large reports, why can't they just ask the question, right? Why can't they just have them just ask? It's I've given some examples of these questions. I mean, these are all again from users, or rather, the applications which we have built for some of our customers, in the engineering field or in the healthcare field and all that, right? I think rather than them looking at or trying to get these answers from a metric, in terms of they ask the question and then the system kind of responds back. See, as you can see, it's like for a question like, hey, sales by category, it just brings back the metric, and along with that, so I can just go and ask, hey, so I just ask this question, and then it just gives me, hey, this is the segment, 54% of it, this is the amount, this many orders, all these stuff. It kind of brings it back, and right. And in addition to that, it also gives me a whole bunch of insights, right? Not just related to this, hey, what within this consumer segment, right? So it just tells me, just this is how the various shipping modes were used. And then, so central region is the one, which has a significant amount of, from this particular segment. All these kind of insights related to this question, is this, rather than providing a metric which the users try to interpret and get their answers on. Now we are just trying to reverse that. Hey, why can't we just let the users ask the question? Because each one of their information needs are very, very different. Why can't they just let them ask the question and then, let the application respond back? I mean, it can respond back in text or metrics like this, or as I said, it can even be something like, so it's just going to give me this metric, I mean, if you want, I can ask them, hey, just break it down by ship mode, all these kind of stuff, that you can change the visualization types. See, the key thing here is, as I said, I started with this pretext of this problem, in terms of how every question or every additional metric kind of becomes a project. This low code platform, what we have, it's kind of takes care of that. It's like, once you connect, or rather, once you train this application on the particular data set, everything comes out of the box, without writing any single line of code. That's the whole idea behind it. I'll also talk about it, just a little bit in a few minutes. But I thought, okay, I'll just give these examples in terms of what we really mean by, leveraging conversational AI related technologies, for data analytics. I think, which is basically like the examples I showed you, the ability to ask questions, in English. See, in fact, since we're talking about language, right? Let me give another example. Say I can say that, hey, so I'm just asking, hey, give me the furniture orders in Texas. So it just says, now I can just have with, answer, continue the conversation like this. So now, it just knows we are talking about the furniture orders, right? I think, Texas was a state. Now I just asked using a pronoun, I just asked, how about California? It kind of knows, has these intelligence in the sense, hey, you know what? California, it just replaced Texas with California and still gave me the furniture orders, okay, for California. I can even continue, it's like this. It's basically the furniture orders in California is what it's going to give me. So it's like furniture order in California. I just added a time dimension to it. It just gave me that order. So it's like it has gone up, and it also gives me a few more inputs. And in the sense, it's since we are talking about a specific year, it says, hey, you know what? Compared to the previous year, it has gone up by delta and all these. I mean, so that the way you can engage in a conversation, it's again another example of how I mean, we are trying to apply this conversational AI related stuff for data analytics, right? So absolutely, it's a free format, English questions you can ask on any of the attributes. So what do we really mean? I mean, what does this data set contain? You can just see this is the data glossary. I mean, all the metrics here, the data attributes available, the different categories, the different measures. Using any of these data attributes, now you have an ability to engage in a conversation. Right? So that's the whole idea behind, I mean, trying to leverage conversational AI. Now, I'll just quickly get into the data activation part, right? So I mean, again, to simplify it, so today, if we are consuming data through dashboards, so say, for example, if I need to get the answer to this question, which region is doing well in product XYZ, there are two ways I can do it. One is the way, conventionally, which we do today, just it's basically trying to look at a dashboard, just playing around with it, you know, and with an ability to assimilate this information, or, spending that much amount of time trying to get that answer, right? Or rather, why can't I just ask someone, just like the way the examples I showed you, right? I mean, why can't we just ask that question and then, very extremely pointed questions, and then, for it to respond back. So that was a quick summary or an example, in terms of conversational AI before I jump into data activation. And then the third step, I'll show an example of how we combine these two technologies, right? Conversational AI as well as data activation to solve few business problems. I'll give quite a bit of examples as well. Any questions so far on what we discussed? You can post it in the chat, if there is any, either we can take it now, or, I can even come back later, right? All right, so now, with that context on examples on what exactly, conversational AI, and then, how we apply that within the data analytics space. Let's just get into the problem around, or the second part of, or rather the second keyword in this today's topic, right, which is around data activation. What exactly is data activation? I mean, again, people who are been in this industry are familiar with this. Please forgive me, if I'm stating the obvious, but it's again a new concept, or rather, I would say it's been there forever, but at the same time, it's getting a lot more traction these days, right? I think it's basically when you have insights, data insights, we at the end of the day, we consume data, we consume information for a business need, either to take a decision or take an action and all that. So data activation kind of helps you, with the last step, which is basically how do you convert these information or insights, to take an action? Say, for example, in the previous question I had, hey, it's like there are 110 orders, for furniture in California. So what do I do with this? It's not that, people stare at these numbers and then, feel good about it. There is something, which we need to do. Maybe, what it is doing well. I may want to, do some actions. Say, for example, maybe if this is very less, 110 is extremely less, or rather, it does not help me, meet some of those targets. Perhaps I may run a different campaign to promote this, right? Or you can even turn it down to say, for example, there are so many days in which there were no orders. Perhaps that requires an action, right? So that is precisely is what data activation is about. Now, having this information at our disposal, right? What do we really do, and how do we seamlessly do that, from an application? I think that's exactly what I'm just going to talk about. One is a data activation. As I said, it helps. It's a they call it as unlocking the value. It's basically how does it really help, to take actions. But the second part of this question is also, how does an application like, what I just showed you here, how does our platform help you achieve that, right? So we'll just talk about both these, right? So if you look at any of the modern day data stack, this is the way, it's like there are four major steps. The data acquisition, from where, from all the source systems through which, we get that. There is this data integration layer where we combine these. It could be from files, it could be from this transactional data versus customer data, billing data, orders. We just kind of try to merge them together and then do the transformations which are required for the reporting layer, build the enterprise data warehouse, and from there the data is consumed, in whatever BI tools or reporting tools, we make use of, right? I think it's a very, very common, absolutely, nothing magical about this. It's a very common data stack in any implementation today, right? So within this, where exactly does data activation fit in, right? So it's basically, how do you take this warehouse, data, and then, make it actionable, right? It's basically, as I said, if my the input from this warehouse, gives me this information, how do I consume this 110 or this 12.2 the delta of 12.2, increase? What do I really do with that? How do I really tie this to a business, action? That's exactly what data activation is about. It's basically not just consuming the information. How do we even make this actionable, right? So it's the third part, as I said. So focus on, it's like not, focus from, just shifting from simply understanding to taking an action on, right? It could be like, say, for example, I may want to run from these orders or with these products or with these customers. I may want to run a campaign. So I may want to integrate this within my CRM application, right? Or I may want to assign this as a task to somebody. Maybe, this is an information, which is useful for my regional sales manager. So he may want to act on it, right? So how do we tie the last part of action is what, the whole data activation layer is about, right? So like I've just tried to put that in the picture. If you take the previous data stack information, right? So you have these, the insights, the numbers, right? How do you now tie this back for typical business functions? It could be like quality management, finance and ERP, marketing, or anything. It could even be, say, for example, maybe if you're looking at the you know, say, even if it is a simple piece of defects, you may want to take an action on it. How do we really assign to an RC and assign this to somebody, right? All of these, whatever you see there, like the 5 examples I've given, these are all like examples of how the data could be used for, the business functions, different business functions, right? One key element of data activation is, at the end of the day, right, every insight is basically, when you're really looking at a number, say, for example, even in this, going back to this example, whether it is the order count of 110 or the changing order, which is the delta, which is like gone up by 12.2%. All these are basically customer attributes or business attributes which requires some attention. It could be like the recent signups. Maybe I can ask a question on, hey, how many new customers did we sign up last week, right? So if it is this number, for this, maybe, the 10 signups, I may want to take an action of, hey, what, let's send them a follow-up email, or maybe, let's just send them a coupon, let's send them a promotional email, right? The items in cart. Someone was, trying to place an order, and then, they just left in the cart and no action has been taken. What do we do? So we just take that, say, the shopping cart information at any point in time, send an email reminder, hey, what, have left these two items, do you want to complete the transaction? All these numbers, whether it is the items in cart, this number of signups, I mean, I've just given quite a bit of examples there. All of these are again numbers which which come as an output from your BI, whether it is the answer which you got, I just showed, or, it is the dashboard BI, wherever it is, right? These numbers are the ones, which really drive that action based on, what you really want to do with it. It's right. I think that's the whole point about it. At the end of the day, right, when you have a question that is answered, now you really want to take some actions and then tie it to the business application. So here are a few examples. Say for example, if you are talking about sales, I mean, going back to that example, in terms of 110 orders, what do I really want to do? What maybe you can use these insights to do promotion. Say for example, I can ask some question like, hey, got it. Yeah, okay. So there are like 18 orders, and then I know that this is one of my important customers. So what I can really do, I can go here and then do some. Say for example, I can take an action. Maybe I can ask. It's like I can send a email coupon for this particular customer. Maybe this cut. I just look at this data and see that this particular customer has not done any transaction recently. Maybe I just want to send them something, right? So that's the whole idea behind one example of how data activation could be used for within sales, which is one is personalization, reaching out to the customers with some context. In this particular case, the context is around the orders or the transactions, which I have done recently. And the another key thing, which is very popular within the sales, it's called as product-led growth. It's like if you really know how a customer is using your product, you can use that particular information, to say, for example, let me give you one. Say we use say this platform, which is called. Yeah, we use this, we track people in terms of, how they really use this application. Let me just quickly show you. Yeah, this is the one. So it's like I can find out, hey, so I see that, hey, this is the way people have used my application. So I see that, hey, this is it's me, and then there are so many different people. If there is one user, who has used it a lot, or rather, if I know that these are a bunch of users who have not really done something, perhaps I can run a campaign to tell them. So say for example, I can ask them, so it's run a campaign on them, and just it could be an email campaign. I can create some campaign for them with this particular data, whatever I have, right? So compare this to how it happens today in any setup, so that people will download this into an Excel sheet or send this to somebody, and then somebody will work on this Excel sheet and then go and manually do this within the CRM application. I think that's the way the actions kind of, or rather, what we call is quote unquote the data activation kind of takes place, right? Instead, what we are saying is, here is a platform, which not just produces your output, at the same time, it also helps you work on it or rather take action on it. And I think, I mean, that's pretty much, it's an example of, how we're really trying to combine, the insights, the analytics part of it, the information need by just providing this answer, as well as there is a whole bunch of thing, if you really want to do something, you can just integrate it with many of the business app. I mean, there are a few examples I've shown here, but we have like 100 plus integrations, and many of those integrations are customized, at the customer level. So it's any of your, instead of Zoho CRM, it could be a Salesforce CRM, right? So maybe, you want to run a marketing campaign, or rather, you want to do a follow-up with these. Or it can even be, say, for example, I have an account manager, who has to perhaps, call these. What I can do is I can post them internally, we use Teams. I can just say that, hey, you know what? Let me go and share this with, I'm just sharing it for myself. So I'm just adding a note and then, just posting it in Teams. So from here, it's like I just sent it to myself, and here I have, I mean, those, from there, I just got that, the metric, it just gets posted to my, the Teams account, right? So I think that's the whole idea behind, how you really combine, the data and insights, and by integrating it with actions, for the data activation layer, right? So this is one example on sales. So similarly, within the marketing world, I mean, I also talked about it. There is a whole bunch of customers. Now, you can really create a campaign and then, give it to them. And then, say, for example, rather than sending this, downloading the sheet, sending it to your marketing team, and then, having them run those campaigns. Now, it's like, why can't we integrate this whole layer, within the BI application as well, which is like, yeah. The second one is the customer service. So let me give you, again, in terms of, if we have an ability to track the user experience, or, it's like, or even the website performance, how many of them, if the bounce rate is very high, how do you really even act on it? Those kind of stuff, again, going back to this example of where, we have our, let me just, let me get here. Okay, so this is again on, the way I was saying, it's on the user. So I can just say that, hey, so I'm just looking at, how many users had, got error responses. So it just answer. Okay, so I see that, there is one particular user who's got, so what do I really do? Could be something, there are basically 44 errors. I really want to create a task and assign it to somebody in my team to work on, right? So I can create a task. We use Notion for defect database. So, I can just go on and create defect here, and then it poses an entry. I can assign it to this person, it becomes a work item for that. All of these kind of, happens within, at that particular instant, within the context of the BI world. That's pretty, what we call as really data activation, and then in the sense, it's not just about consuming that information. How do you really even take an instant action with deep context? I mean, you're just looking at a piece of information. Now you know that, hey, you know what, this is what I need to do, right? I think that's the whole idea behind, the data activation, right? So, as I said, it's not new. I mean, it's been happening forever. It's just that it was happening in a different way. I mean, many people consume reports for these purposes. I mean, say, for example, even in this case, the way it would normally happen is somebody will go and download this report in a CSV or Excel, send it to someone, and then say, hey, you know what, send an email, hey, saying, hey, you know what, Alex, can you just take a look at this? This needs to be analyzed. If each one of these errors that need to be acted on, rather in a laborious process, someone really sitting and creating those defects, manual work involved, in terms of creating those defects, right? Those are some of these activities, it's we are solving by, this technology around for data activation. One is integrating with any of the third-party APIs, doing it at scale. Definitely, if there are 48 errors, definitely you don't need 48 entries, for somebody to go and do that manually. Rather, application can take care of it, right? And obviously, the third point is, it's basically it just helps saves time, so much of time and effort. I think that's the biggest saving by leveraging, technologies around this, right? So, I mean, so what we're really saying is, while this was the traditional data stack, I mean, which stopped kind of pretty much stopped at the consumption layer around BI and dashboards, we are just adding one more. Why can't we just integrate this, since most of the applications today are available APIs? Why can't we bring in this new to the data activation? Right. And the data activation could do so many things. One is integrating with various apps. I showed you examples around, CRM, or creating a task, sending an email, posting a message, and all that. Or rather, it can even be for data distribution. Some of our customers, use this. They schedule reports. Hey, you know what? At every Friday, 5 p.m., ask this question, and then email this report, to this person. All these are now possible, within the context of the BI tool itself, which is our platform. So, I mean, as I said, I think the best insights are the one, which are acted upon at that very moment, right? And the key benefit of this data activates, it's more like the second point. I think with almost every application today available as an API, I think you have so many possibilities with integrating them, right? So there are various ways in which you can do little bit of technology. It's one is via APIs, event triggers, the notification. I just showed an example of how it could even notify somebody within the Teams platform. Task management, I give an example of how somebody can create a task in Notion or Trello, whatever it is. Absolutely any application. I just have few examples, but absolutely any application, whatever you use today, whether it is Jira, Trello, anything, you can do that, right? So one common technique which is used to achieve this, it's I don't know if you've heard about this. It's called reverse ETL. While ETL was on the bringing in the data, which is basically extract, transform, and load. Bringing in the data from the source systems into the warehouse. Now the reverse ETL kind of takes care of the, it's basically the reverse process. How do we take the data from the warehouse, feed it back to the business applications? That's what we kind of did, even in these examples. If you really look at it, this information came from a warehouse. This or rather the answer to these questions came from a warehouse. Now, how do I take this back and feed it back to a source application? I think that's what happens, in the data activation layer, and using this, concept called reverse ETL. Right. So it's basically what you do, you take the output, and then, we kind of map it back to the source systems. So it's just like how you do that on the ETL part, mapping the source to a target. Here you map the analytic output in the, even say, in this case, what we do is we take, so if I say this, hey, let me show this example. If I'm trying to create a task, so it's basically, it takes the data from that, from the output which we just got, it just maps it to these different fields, the defined type and all that, and then it just posts that entry in Notion here, right? I think that's pretty much what happens here. You try to map it from the analytics output into the business applications. And I mean, even if it is posting an message, we just input the email ID, and then it creates the message in Teams, or it could be posting it in Zoho CRM and all that, right? Very similar to the ETL layer. Now you're just doing the reverse part, which is from the insights or from the analytics into back to the business application. So that's, I mean, it's one of the most common, or rather, very popular technique these days for data activation. So it's just adds a new layer to the data stack, at the end so the enterprise warehouse kind of acts as the hub. And from there, the data now flows back to the business applications. So how do we combine these two, right? I mean, I think that's the whole idea behind it. We talked about conversational AI, and then, now, we talked about data activation. How do we really combine these two to solve business problems. I mean, I showed a few examples there. I think that's pretty much, what we have in our platform. It's called Kia. Just sort of curious if you're wondering, Kia is one of the smartest parrot species available. So that's why we picked this name for this platform. So what does it do? I gave a lot of examples. It just lets you ask questions in English, simple English. So what exactly is the platform? It's helps you get instant answers, and then it's using language constructs and do a lot more. Like the examples I showed you, one is asking questions, taking actions, and say for example, let me show you another one. Say I have something around the logistics thing, right? So there are a few interfaces. One is very simple search bar like this, just like any of the search engine. I mean, I have quite a bit of questions here, so somebody can just go and ask a question like this. It just brings back the data. There are so many things, it does. Say, for example, I can go and change the visualization, whatever. So this is a way of consuming the information. The second thing is around, say for example, that it's very similar to a chat interface like Slack or Teams or anything. Here now you're just engaging in a conversation on the data. I showed you this example of, by using it in the chat interface, you can use pronouns, engage in a conversation. There are so many things, you can favorite something, add a tag, similar to, you can hashtag it for easy search. So say I'm looking at this data. Now I also see that, hey, you know what? This particular one, it's like I really need to bring in some of the users, right? So all those things, I can really do here. So say I have this data set. Just taking a lot more time than normally it does. Okay. I have this information now, I can take a whole bunch of actions. I just showed a lot of examples there, and then, and share it with people. So that pretty much, as I said, Kia kind of does, it's like, you can onboard as many data sets as you want. I mean, there is a whole bunch of stuff I have, right? I can even there are so many data sets which we have connected, and these data sets could be of, I mean, extremely large volume, and then, files, databases, whatnot, wherever the data, Kia can connect to it and then answer those questions. So the ideas behind this, how do you turn data into, answers and insights, right? I think very simple steps. Connect to data. It can be through streams. I mean, it can even listen to Kafka stream or even Hub, or the data could be in files, databases, APIs, anywhere. You can feed it to our low-code platform. And one key thing which also it does is, I told you about when we are talking about language, there is always this, it's the challenge around, the vocabulary. Somebody could call it as a location, somebody could call it as a place. You can define a whole bunch of synonyms for a particular data attribute and then, ask those questions. Say, let me give an example here. Uh, so you can see that it's like value. It's also called as member. Say for example, there is an attribute called port name. So I can ask port or entry point. So I can ask this question by port, or I can even ask this same question it's just go understand that, hey, what, this definition, I have just defined port and location as a synonym for this. So it's just going to give me the same, hey, all kinds of, I mean, this particular question I can just ask and then, it's going to respond back, right? So that's one, or I would say one significant feature of an application which is powered by language interface, which is basically, you have an ability to redefine the technical names, or the column names or attributes into meaningful business terms. I think, this is extremely useful for, many of the business folks. This is one of the biggest challenge, we have with the data glossary, right? I think so. Language interface kind of provides this ability, right? I think we saw there is answers are numbers, voice. I mean, it's also available in a mobile platform, so it can be in voice. It can in visuals and all that. Um, so with that, I mean, once you have the answers, definitely, I give you a lot of examples around how can it be integrated with so many business functions, like there is a whole bunch of integrations we have out of the box, but I mean, if there is anything custom that needs to be done, it can be built as long as, you have those APIs available using reverse ATL. And then that way, the four is nothing but the data activation part, right? We can integrate those business applications within that within Kia for us to to take care of the data activation layers, and all in one place. It's completely cloud based. More since it is related to data, most of our enterprise implementations, it happens on premise. The data doesn't get need to be shipped. We bring the software, and then it runs within your firewall and within your data center, and then within your cloud instance, and then that's where it runs. But at the same time, we do have a SaaS application as well. We have our own secure cloud, right? Very simple. In fact, that's the power of this whole platform. I mean, even though we say 5 minutes, I mean, it's very simple Excel sheets of very small data sets, you can just onboard it in no time. But at the same time, even very large databases, the whole thing happens, whatever you see here, all the visualizations, everything, all of that happens, without writing a single line of code, right? Um, Multiple ways. I showed you about the search widget and then the chat application. There is a mobile application as well. So this is the Kia ecosystem. See, one thing you can also do is a lot of companies, they have their own web applications, where they build the dashboard and all that, right? You can onboard a data set and then have embed the Kia response. It's within your application. So what really happens is you just it's a small, very small piece of code that can be used. Let me show an example here. So you can see this um, small piece of information, very similar to how you embed a tweet or anything. I think you can buy onboarding your data in Kia, and then if you really don't want to invest on building your own dashboards and all that, you can embed the Kia response and combine it with any other other enterprise applications you may have, right? I think this is one. Some of our customers use this in the sense they do not that way they do not have to invest in writing code to produce these metrics, right? So as I said, it's a complete low code framework, and it's white labeled, in the sense Kia is a generic name, but the way it is being used is, I mean, like Twinkle, Ginger, Erica, whatever it is, it's completely just like how we have Alexa or Siri. Customers, they brand it with their own name, and the colors, branding, everything is completely it's white label. You can customize it. Um, the key thing is, where it really helps is with time to market. I mean, in no time, absolutely, without the need to write code to produce these dashboards. I think, you can, all it cares about is data. Obviously, whenever we talk about data, the key thing is with security, information security and access. There is a whole bunch of features, we have related to information security. Very elaborate role-based access control. You have an ability to define and mask PII, sensitive information. That way, it's completely, it's obfuscated. The data is encrypted. So users get to see, only what they are supposed to see. See, all of that, it's kind of, it goes without saying. I think, the response takes care of pretty much, all this required privacy and information security practices, right? So putting it together, how the conversational AI part as well as the data activation part, I think this is the way it goes. You have the data coming from, from left to right. If you read it, wherever it is, your data, it could be from your warehouse, it could be from your source application. You onboard your data set into Kia, which is again define the vocabulary and all that. And now, you can start asking questions, and from those questions are the output. It kind of, you also integrate, bring in the data activation part, integrating with the business apps and all that, right? So in summary, what does Kia bring? I think, combining the conversational AI and then the data activation part, right? It's a simple conversational interface with your ability to ask questions in English, can respond back in voice, visuals, and in insights. Obvious, the number four, I can't stress it enough. It's like completely, it's secure by design. There are so many elements, which is built in within the application to take care of information security. Whole bunch of use case themes. Starting from, I mean, some of the instances are like, we have it available in the tablet. So the customers, wherever you have a need to for offline access, say it could be in a factory floor or for doctors, or somebody could be wearing gloves, rather than using computers. Now, they have an ability to ask questions. And by the way, it also has a voice interface. They can just ask the question in voice, it responds back. Right? Getting rid of all the legacy reports, right? I think completely it's a new way to reimagine dashboards. I mean, rather than building custom dashboards, why can't we let the people ask a question? Now, I mean, within Kia, by the way, somebody, if they like few answers, they can put it back and create a dashboard within Kia and all those things, it's possible. And the last, I mean, related to today's, I think the key feature here is also around data activation. How do you really integrate this with the business application? Quite a bit of, I mean, a lot of happy customers. We have been doing this for quite some time. And then, a lot of very interesting projects. The largest data set, goes up to 7 million rows and all that. Very large data sets, right? And across industries. Yeah, very simple to get onboarded. So, I mean, here's an email ID, and then, so it's like definitely if you really need more information, I know it was such a quick one on within an hour. Be more than happy to do a technical deep dive or, start with a very simple free POC and all that. I think, definitely would love to feel free to reach out to us. So the bottom line, where does it really help? The whole idea behind, or rather, it's this. I think if you look at the way it's, today's data engineering or the analytics spaces, right? There is a whole bunch of fragmented tool sets. One to do data integration, another one to do this, another one for collaboration, another one for reverse ETL. We are kind of, trying to say, hey, why can't we build a complete data stack, for the AI world? I mean, powered by a language interface, powered by a lot of, AI features with automatic insights and all that. Added to that, that there is a collaboration part, the reverse ETL part, and all that. I think that's pretty much what the platform offers. I mean, basically those 3 points here. I think how would the business intelligence world would be, like few years from now. I think that's what we're trying to imagine here. It's the genesis of, or rather, from dashboards to reports. Where do we really go? Where does this BI world really go? I mean, right. All of us are extremely comfortable using a search engine, search analytics. Can we try to replicate a similar experience for enterprise customers, right? Complete information platform, I just talked about it. And then, of course, obviously, agility is extremely important. I mean, I think the days of running BI projects for months, I think it's getting over. Can we really get something, get insights as quickly as possible, right? So that's the whole idea behind, Kia. Yeah, exactly on time, little over a minute. I will stop here, and that was a quick rundown on the concepts around conversational AI as well as data activation, and then a quick introduction on our platform.